in 2012, I'd kind of given up on the Bible, which is funny because it's when we also started Bible Project. But it makes sense in that I wanted to understand theology. I wanted to have the answers, and I wanted to be able to explain the answers really well. But I had given up trying to understand how I was going to find those answers in the Bible. Um, I grew up in a tradition that said, here's the answer sheet. Now go find the answers in the Bible and during your quiet time. And I would go and I'd open the Bible and I would go, I don't see these answers that you're giving me. And I would be embarrassed to admit it. And when I did admit it, I would be, I'd get a lot of skepticism and just kind of like this try harder kind of mentality. So somewhere after Bible college, while I was doing the explainer video thing in the marketplace, I just kind of was like, I got the answers and the Bible is still confusing. It just feels like it's getting in the way. I can just follow Jesus without really caring about the Bible. That was my mentality. It wasn't a conscious decision. I wouldn't have even said it that way, but that was just the reality.
Welcome to the Rethinking Christianity podcast, a home to conversations focused on rethinking, challenging, and engaging with Christian thought. You can visit us on Instagram and Facebook at Rethinking Christianity Podcast. I'm your host, Blake Fine, and thank you for tuning in to today's episode. On today's episode of Rethinking Christianity, we have John Collins from the Bible Project. John is the co-creator and the creative director of the Bible Project. If you're not aware of what the Bible Project is, you need to look them up, but they offer some really cool content for how to approach the Bible and the videos that they put out. John, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me today.
Yeah, good to be here. Thanks for having me, Blake.
Yeah, no worries. So you went to, I think, how do I pronounce it? Is it Multnomah University?
Yeah,
Cool.
Multnomah.
So what was your, like, I guess, faith background like growing up? I think I heard you grew up in Portland and you went to school there. So I probably have a very different kind of background growing up in the Bible Belt, but I'd love to hear kind of some of your perspective.
It might not be that different, actually.
Okay.
I was born in Portland. I grew up in the suburbs of Seattle, so Northwest kid. And I grew up in a evangelical, kind of Baptist rooted church, non-denominational church. And it was very, it was awesome. I mean, I loved it. Like, it was a great childhood. I never had really a rebellious moment in my growing up. I just was always a very inquisitive kid, and really learned the boundaries pretty early of like what questions were off limits and what was on limits. But I was really eager to like make my faith work. And in my senior year of high school, I had a youth pastor who really helped me connect my faith to my mind in a really great way that charged me up enough to go to Bible college. And so then I came back to Portland to go to Multnomah University and study Bible theology. And I did that for 4 years. And that's where I met Tim. That's where I met my wife as well. And I've stayed in Portland ever since.
That's cool. So when you were doing was it in, I guess, biblical studies and like theology?
Yeah.
Is that like, was that ever in the realm of like what you thought you would be studying in college, I guess, when you were in high school?
You know, I don't know why, but I just never thought about what I was going to study after high school. It
Me
just was
either.
not even on my radar. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I know certain kids were like all about it, but I didn't think about it at all. And so when it started coming to the point of what am I going to do for college, my youth pastor, who I was just talking about, he had gone to Multnomah. My dad actually graduated from Multnomah.
Oh, cool.
Um, and I thought, oh, cool, I'll just go there for a year. Like, I don't know what else to do. So and it sounds fun, and I really want to understand the Bible more. So I went just thinking I'd go for a year and figure it out. And and I stayed for 4 years.
Yeah, that's
And
awesome.
at that point, I actually had a vision for like the church, like and working for the church. I mean, of course, it's like you go to a school like that, and that's what everyone that is there for.
Yeah.
And so, I also became really interested in. I was a communications major, so I really loved the idea of how do you. I mean, sermons can be so boring.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I've had sat through, I don't even know how many thousands of hours of sermons in my life, right?
Yeah.
And the amount of those that actually were impactful for me could be counted on maybe one hand. And um, but I was listening to this pastor back then who just like was a really great storyteller. He was really great communicator, was able to kind of take you on a journey. It almost like it felt like you were watching a movie more than listening to a sermon. And I was like, what is he doing? And how do you do that? And so I just became really interested in novel communication within church settings.
Yeah.
Um, this was back when I'm not sure if you were around the scene when like Rob Bell was
Yeah.
doing his Numa thing.
Yeah, those are so cool. The one he does where he's like planting a tree,
Yeah,
dude, it's like
the
a
two
total
trees.
different way of approaching like just scripture and theology. Yeah.
Yeah, so actually that one in particular too, it was like so simple. It was just him on a sidewalk planting two trees, talking about the tree of the Garden of Eden, the tree of life there, and how it shows up at the end of the story of the Bible too. And it's this 10-minute little homily while he's planting a tree. And I was more engaged and I learned more and I thought more about this idea in the Bible than in any sermon I'd ever listened to. And so I was like, what is happening? Like, what is this? So I became really interested in digital media at that point. And
It's cool.
yeah.
What did that process look like from like going like learning like I guess how to put that into action? So like were you always interested in I guess the animated type of storytelling or the animated type of like creating visuals and things like that?
No, so the journey into that was I loved what Rob Bell was doing with the Numa, and I had no experience with any sort of video production.
Gotcha.
So um I bought some video editing software and a camera, and I started making projects for people. And it was a typical kind of just like promo video stuff. And during those projects is when I started to learn that I started to notice that I would go and shoot things. I'd come back to edit it and I'd be really dissatisfied with what I shot. It was just bad lighting, bad composition, just everything. I was just like, oh, what is this? And so, um, for a couple of projects, I started to figure out how to lean in on just using really simple visuals, stuff I would draw, stuff I would just find, and and then I learned how to do keyframing. I started learning After Effects, and so I started to learn animation to supplement my really bad cinematography. And then I learned that you could actually communicate a lot and get through some dense ideas with these visuals when done in a specific way. And so I was working on that, doing those kind of projects, and and there's this phenomenon of the explainer video that was actually being birthed at that time. And so I just kind of ended up being on the ground floor with a bunch of other people figuring out this new type of media. That the best word I have for it is explainer video. um, but it's just relying on animation to explain things with really short pieces of media.
That's cool. That's really cool. Yeah, I'll tell you, one of my first like encounters of kind of understanding story in general with like the Bible was watching The Prince of Egypt.
Oh
Till
yeah.
till this day, like so that like so for me, like my beginning points, I'm like being like 5 years old, 6 years old, watching The Prince of Egypt like over and over again. And so it's really interesting how like those types of communication can sometimes have a way bigger impact than the stuff that is most used usually in church. which is like what you mentioned, sermons and things like that. So I think that, obviously what y'all are doing is really connecting with people. And I think it has a lot of really, like you mentioned, it has a lot of like different ways you can communicate a lot of different things. So when did y'all begin, I guess, the conversations around like creating these videos of explaining the Bible? Like what year was that? Was there some kind of need that y'all saw that was like, let's try and fill this need?
Yeah, it was 2012, I think, and I I was making explainer videos for a lot of tech companies, and I had a fairly successful video production company that was making these for tech companies, startups, nonprofits, um, and uh, and it was going really well. And I was also just getting bored of making explainer videos about whatever new tech product was out there. It was a lot of cloud computing stuff back then. Um, and and I really was interested in how to use the medium for other things, like ideas that are really important to understand. And and one of those is trying to understand the Bible, understand God, um, and and theology in general. And and so one of the project ideas always humming in the back of my mind was some sort of YouTube channel that used explainer videos to do theology.
Hmm.
Um, and I I actually, the name I wanted to use for it was Theology is Boring, was the YouTube channel. And I started writing scripts for it, and I just became very aware of how much I didn't understand. And I was also, the internet can be really mean. So like I just was like, I can't make these videos. I don't know what I'm talking about. Uh and um but Tim, I met Tim in college. We became friends. Our wives are friends and remained really good friends. And Tim and his wife moved out to Madison, Wisconsin, where he went, just continued to study the Bible for just years. He got his
Yeah.
PhD in um biblical studies and Semitic languages. And um so him and I stayed in touch throughout the years. And and then he moved back to Portland in 2012. So when he moved back to Portland, I was like, Tim, can you do this YouTube channel with me? Like, you know what you're talking about. And I just love talking about the Bible with him because he's one of the guys that I could ask all my questions to. Like
Yeah.
I mentioned how I knew where the boundary lines were of certain questions you could ask and not ask. When I would hang out with Tim, there was no boundary lines. Like I just would ask whatever. And I could persistently ask whatever. And Tim would kind of be like, yeah, and he'd pile on his questions onto my question. And we would just get it all out there. And then when we'd go to the Bible, he'd really help me see and try to not just take my questions and just force the Bible to answer my questions, but to try to come to the Bible and say, what is this doing as literary art? Like what questions is it asking and churning on? And just those conversations were always so rewarding. So I asked him if he would write some videos with me, and he was down. He was working for a church in Portland, and that church gave him like a day a week to work on it with me, or half a day a week at first. And we just started writing scripts in 2012, and then we had our first two videos that we released in 2014. We worked on it for a while, just kind of slowly, just kind of trying things out, trying to figure out how these videos would work. And then we were off to the races. We released those videos in 2014, and now 9 years later, almost, we've done 180 videos
That's so cool.
and a lot of other stuff as well. Yeah.
Did you ever imagine it'd be like what it is today?
No, we really thought it would be like a side project. Like I would just use contractors. Tim would do it on the side. I would do it on the side. We would just make a video at a time with freelancers. And I had no idea that we'd be able to build an internal animation studio, build a whole organization that's now doing technology. We're building tech. we're experimenting with other types of media. Um, we're localizing, we're like translating our videos in all these different languages. And no clue. Yeah, no idea.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was a senior in high school in 2012 and graduated in 2013, and I had just, I grew up in church, but I didn't really care that much about it till my senior year. And I remember we started using some of the Bible Project videos that, like, I think that I was still at that church in when those videos had first, like, early on when they
Oh
first
wow.
come out. So I was
Yeah.
like an intern. And I remember what was available we would use because they were just so useful. Did y'all always intend for them to be like animated? Were they all like,
Yeah.
or were there other kind of like I guess ideas for how to present that information?
Yeah, at that point it was all animation. I love how
That's cool.
much you can communicate with animation and how captivating it can be. Um, I also love how it depersonalizes it. Like, um, Tim and I have become a known quantity in some ways, but in other ways it's like we're just voices behind animations. So it's just different, like
Yeah.
um, and that's really nice.
I mean, people know about y'all. I will say that I mean, there's a whole, I think there's like a whole Facebook group that like is dedicated to Bible Project stuff. It's actually really cool community. So y'all have made a real impact on people and their journey of like walking through the Bible. I mean, it's helped me out a lot. One of the things that y'all presented, and I didn't really get into it much until I was in my undergrad, and I did like biblical studies as well,
Okay.
is this idea of, narrative, and literary art. Where did that kind of like come from? Because, obviously there's a lot of different ways to approach the Bible, but this kind of form of narrative in the Bible, I think is why people I think are drawn to it, because it's a little bit different than what a lot of people I think are accustomed to when they approach the Bible.
Yeah. Well, at Multnomah, there's a professor, Ray Lubeck, and every student would take what's called an intro to Bible study methods class. And in this class, you read the book of Jonah, and you uh, have to pay attention to just narrative things like setting, character, plot. Um, and then you also look at the structure of the book, like how is the book designed and its structure. And then you're supposed to like take all those things and help those things, those literary elements, become your exegetical tool to then tell you what is the book of Jonah about. And um, every student would always have a really eye-opening experience with that, because most of the time when you hear the story of Jonah, you've heard a retelling of it, like a Sunday school retelling of it. Um, and to go and read it and really trace its narrative and like kind of like ask the questions it's asking and rub up against the tensions it's bringing up, you start to realize this book is about something else entirely than what you thought. And that Jonah is not actually a hero. Um, and it's in some ways unsettling and in some ways like just pretty revitalizing. Like you're just like, whoa, like I can just read the Bible as literature and I can start to learn what it means. Um, and that whole kind of idea of reading the Bible as literature, I think is scary for a lot of especially conservative Christians, because it makes it feel like, oh, we're treating the Bible just like any other book. But one of the convictions that we have, and is just an orthodox position in Christianity, is the Bible is both human and divine. It is human. It's human literature, and it was written in with certain stylistic genres in mind, conventions, um, and by paying attention to those things, you actually understand it better. Um, and uh, Lubeck, he learned this from guys like Brueggemann and Salehammer. And so there's, a stream of like biblical theology that comes from that kind of literary approach, that just somehow we just got kind of into that stream, and then Tim just kind of like paddled that river as far as it went. And um, so I like to use the word literary art.
Yeah.
I don't know when we started using that, but I just noticed that the things we were paying attention to were design things. We were looking at the structure of the text. We were looking at patterns of how words were used, um, and um, what these ancient Jewish scribes were doing was art. They were using an ancient medium of scroll technology, and they were doing brilliant literary art. Like the smartest artistic literary minds, like applying themselves to this craft and the technology they had in a culture where that was an obsession. The Second Temple scribal culture, where like that was just everything for them. That was their media. And so I love that because we can appreciate an obsession with understanding the art behind media, film critics, and just like obsessing about storytelling, um, and really appreciating visual art. Um, and that's the same care that scribes come to with the Bible. It's art. The media is words. Um, and it is narrative. It's also poetry, and it's also what we would call prose discourse. Um, so three different kind of genres of literature, and all of it though is Jewish
Yeah.
and ancient Jewish, meaning it's not narrative the way we tell narratives, right? Like
Yeah.
Marvel has a way of telling narratives, and maybe 20th century American authors had a way of telling narratives, and Shakespeare had a way of telling narratives. Um, Ancient Jewish culture had a very specific way of doing narrative storytelling, and we should be really interested in like what was that? What was that genre? Same with the poetry, and same with discourse. So um, I'm just rambling here, but I guess the last sentiment to say is how crazy is it that because we follow Jesus, we're now charged to be like obsessed with literary art, ancient Jewish literature.
That's dope.
Like it's like it's kind of weird when you step back. It's like it's such a niche kind of thing to care about.
Yeah.
Um, but then at the same time, it's actually a pretty rewarding thing to be able to dive into. Psalm 1 says, "Blessed is the one who meditates on God's instruction day and night," and it comes in the form of ancient literary art. Just wow. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so cool. Yeah, I for me, like, I grew up in kind of a particular way to approach reading the scriptures. Not wrong or anything like that or bad, but what I've found is the more I would come to the Bible and kind of set aside my like preconceived, I guess, dispositions and I guess a bit, I don't know, like just kind of preconceived ideas about the Bible, and the more I was kind of open to like this being something to be explored, not something that's just like this is how it is and you got to look at it this way.
Yeah.
It really shifted how my appreciation for the Bible, because like you mentioned, like the scribes were brilliant, like the things that they're doing and the structure that they're presenting. That really has had a huge impact on me of just like changing how I approach the Bible. And it's like this continual journey. It's like you're never going to really have a resolve or have all your questions, I guess, figured out. Have you found like and I think this would be natural regardless, but how has your kind of approach to reading the Bible, I guess, personally been changed through working on the projects that y'all do and since, I guess, 2012 to now?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's been overhauled. In 2012, I'd kind of given up on the Bible, which is funny because it's when we also started Bible Project. But it makes sense in that I wanted to understand theology. I wanted to have the answers, and I wanted to be able to explain the answers really well. But I had given up trying to understand how I was going to find those answers in the Bible. Um, I grew up in a tradition that said, here's the answer sheet. Now go find the answers in the Bible and during your quiet time. And I would go and I'd open the Bible and I would go, I don't see these answers that you're giving me. And I would be embarrassed to admit it. Um, and when I did admit it, I would be, I'd get a lot of skepticism and just kind of like this try harder kind of mentality. Um, so somewhere after Bible college, while I was doing the explainer video thing in the marketplace, I just kind of was like, I got the answers, and the Bible is still confusing. It just feels like it's getting in the way. I can just follow Jesus without really caring about the Bible. That was my mentality. It wasn't a conscious decision. I wouldn't have even said it that way, but that was just the reality. And so by doing Bible Project, it got me to actually start reading the Bible again. And it took a long time, really slowly reorienting myself to the Bible to where, um, uh, I mean, like yesterday, I was writing a script on Isaiah 61, and I spent like half the day just reading and rereading and thinking about this passage. And I can remember countless times reading Isaiah or Jeremiah or one of the prophetic books and just being like, I am freaking lost. Like every single sentence is just a wormhole of confusion. And now it's like it's not that all the answers are popping, but like I know the questions to ask. I'm seeing the structure, I'm seeing the patterns, I'm seeing what Tim calls hyperlinks. Um uh Part of this is I'm just becoming a lot more familiar with the Hebrew Bible, what we call the Old Testament. And it's amazing how much everywhere in the Bible it's just rehashing the same kind of core ideas. And
Yeah.
if you don't understand these core ideas, which aren't always super familiar, like ideas like holiness or being the image of God or um, God's covenant or, just like this idea of a Messiah, the anointed one, just the kingdom of God, all these concepts, they're you hear these words in church, but I just kind of never really fully had an understanding of what they meant in the literature. And once you start to kind of maybe understand the like these kind of key themes and how they show up and the vocabulary they use and what they mean when they use this vocabulary, just it just starts showing up everywhere. And it becomes less of a linear, like, oh, cool, I get this, now I'm gonna get this, now I'm gonna get that. And it becomes more of this just like immersive tapestry of like seeing something emerge slowly all over the place, linked together, and these ideas emerging. So I don't know. That sounded really
No, no,
abstract.
I get it. No, that's cool.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Yeah. And I feel like one, I'm kind of jealous. Y'all have like the coolest job in the world. You get to work on writing scripts for things that you really, really care about. So I think that's really cool. Um, yeah, I mean the Bible in general is I think a lot of people really struggle with it because kind of what you mentioned, your perspective was like, here's the, I guess, answer sheet in a way. A lot of people have that idea of like the Bible is just this like moral handbook or this rule book or this guide. And I think like what and correct me if I don't get the exact words correct, but y'all's kind of tagline is like the Bible's one story that leads to Jesus. Is that roughly
Hmm.
correct?
Hmm.
Yeah, and so I think that like for people like reapproaching the scripture, beginning to like look at it from that frame and that viewpoint, um, is I think really, really helpful for people. Because what I've found is people don't really have an issue with Jesus when it comes to like
Yeah.
Christianity. And so if they can reframe reading the Bible with that approach, I think it's really helpful. Or it at least it has been for me.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. Like I think that this reference book mentality that's we often have of the Bible, I was kind of given that paradigm of the Bible as maybe a theology reference book, like all the answers you about who God is and how salvation works and how the universe works and all that stuff. Like all the answers are in here. You can find them all. and so it becomes like a theology textbook,
Yeah.
um, or a moral handbook kind of reference book. Like, how do you make the right decisions? You know, what is good and not good to do in any given situation? Um, Consult the Bible. It's a moral handbook. These reference book mentality of the Bible, they have a really good intuition. And the good intuition is the Bible does want to tell us about God in the universe. And the Bible does want to tell us about what it means to live a good life and be in right relationships with each other and in creation. But it doesn't do it as a reference book. And so then the question is, well, how does it do it? And the language we try to put to it is it does it as meditation literature. I quoted Psalm 1, blessed is the one who meditates on God's instruction day and night. He becomes like a tree of life. And that the idea of meditation is like in Hebrew, it's the word Hagah. It means to, it's the sound that a pigeon makes when it like is like a Hagah, or it's the sound that a lion makes when it eats its food.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hagah. So it's just like it's this muttering out loud or just kind of churning on something. Um, and so the idea is that you actually just come to these texts and you speak them out loud in your mind, you churn them around, and you just kind of like let them shape you. Like you come to it like you would come to art. You just kind of you just appreciate and you try to appreciate the beauty of what it is. Um, and and so meditation literature, um, the reason why it will actually shape us and tell us how to live a good life and tell us about who God is, because it wants to impart to us wisdom, but it does so by us meditating on it, by us making connections with it, by us wrestling with the questions that it poses and holding those questions in tension while we continue to read the Bible and letting the Bible, like almost watching the Bible wrestle with it uh, with you, and then beginning to see how it's resolving these things in these kind of unexpected ways. While you're doing that, it's shaping your mind and heart and giving you wisdom. And so it's meditation literature, it's to be wisdom literature. Um, and it's just uh when we talk about it in the abstract, it kind of just, I don't know, it can sound kind of hocus pocus maybe, but like when you sit down and you read the Bible kind of with this paradigm, Tim does it. I mean, I do it with Tim all the time in our podcast episodes. He has classes that we have online that are free, where he just sits down with students and they're just reading through passages and they're using this paradigm. You get it immediately. Like you start doing it and you're like, oh, I get it.
Yeah.
It's like very intuitive. It's like our minds were built to process reality and text and art like in this way. So, um, if that sounds really abstract, maybe just like pull up a classroom class or listen to a podcast and you'll be like, oh, okay. I
Yeah, they're
see it. I feel it.
yeah, yeah, it's good
Yeah.
stuff. Yeah. The classroom stuff, I really enjoy that. I enjoy all of it, but
Oh,
I've really
cool.
enjoyed the classroom stuff. Those are cool.
Awesome.
Yeah, the with the Bible, I don't remember who I heard say it. I think I heard Rob Bell say it actually and reference it, but he says that when rabbis they kind of talk about the scripture, it's kind of like a prism that if you shine light through it, and every time you turn it, the light comes through in a different kind of way, and that the scriptures are very similar in that kind of way where like if you when you begin to look at it from a number of different angles, it begins to shine light in on our wisdom and give us different pieces of information that it's trying to communicate. And I think that you see that in the midrash that they have and things like
Mhm.
that, and that stuff's I think really just really interesting when it comes to like the process of y'all coming up with ideas for videos and uh things like that. What does that look like? Do y'all just kind of, I mean, obviously I know you at this point y'all are very structured, but when you began, was it just like, okay, we're going to do books of the Bible, or are we going to just like try to do a book of the Bible on topics? Like what does that process look like?
Yeah. The original plan was to do a video for every book of the Bible. Um, and then to do what we just start calling theme videos. And a theme video is not a topic per se. A topic is something that the Bible might mention, but
Yeah.
it's not like central in any way to understanding what the Bible's about. So I don't know. What would be a good example? I mean, fasting. That's pretty. That's a pretty core thing to like the religious experience. And the Bible talks about fasting. Um, I don't know. Actually, that's interesting. I wonder if you could turn that into a theme. Um, but um, a lot of like morality things. A lot of like, should I do this? Should I do that? Um, but a theme is an idea that the Bible poses an idea really early on, usually in the first page of a concept, like God's spirit or um, chaos or being the image of God. And it takes this idea, kind of plants the idea, and then what you're going to see then is every single scroll is going to riff on this idea and continue to develop it. Um, and then and it's almost like think of like a melody in a symphony. It's like you start to hear this melody repeat over and over and over. And then the theme has this climactic moment in the life of Jesus and his death and resurrection, and then has its fulfillment in the church and in new creation. And you could just trace the theme all the way through. And so identifying what a theme is and then deciding how you're going to maybe take that theme and pull it apart from all the other themes because they all kind of weave together into one big tapestry, one big symphonic thing. Um, Deciding to pull one out and just examine one on its own, that's the thing we started doing early in the project. And we identified maybe like 12 or 15 themes that we thought we'd want to do. And since then, that list has grown um, and continues to grow. And then on top of that, we've started doing videos on like, we talked about just genre style, like what are the different literary styles. We've done word studies, like what are just the everything comes down to just understanding basic Hebrew and Greek words. This is like the bricks. This is like the paintbrush, you know, um, that they had. And so we've made videos on those. So the library is kind of filled out, but originally it was overview of a book and a theme.
Yeah. So what is like the time frame like look like from like, okay, we're gonna do a theme, for instance, y'all have done like did Spirit of God, I think, or Spirit.
Yeah.
What does the time frame look like from like, okay, we're gonna do this, and then research, script writing, putting it into what does all that look like?
Yeah. So it looks like Tim and I coming together to talk it through. He brings sometimes he brings really robust notes, and sometimes he just comes with like a list of passages to read, and we'll sit down and we'll just talk it through. And we record those conversations, and that's our podcast. We were doing these conversations before we decided to record them as part of the production of a video. And when we're done having those conversations, and sometimes it's like 3 hours, sometimes it's 10 hours, sometimes it's been up to like 20 hours of conversation. Um, then my job is to go and try to distill all of that into a draft of a script. And so what I'm paying attention to is like, what were the big moments of discovery for me? Like where the idea started to land. Like, oh, I didn't realize that. And once I realized that, now this makes sense.
Hmm.
So I kind of trace my own journey of discovery and I try to recreate that journey in a script. And you try to figure out what is interesting but not essential and what is kind of central to understanding the theme so that you can get that all down into like a 5 minute
Yeah.
video. Um, I usually write a first draft. Tim then will redraft, and we'll go back and forth writing drafts together. Um, and then we'll sit down together. We'll read the draft out loud. We'll wordsmith it, and then when we feel like that's in a pretty good shape, we'll sit down with a story artist, and we'll read them the script, and we'll have the story artist come and pitch us visual ideas of how to like reinforce what the script's doing with visuals. And oftentimes that triggers a rewrite because they'll come with questions that we realize there's some ambiguity, or they'll point out things that are redundant, or they'll come with a really cool visual idea that we're like, that's really cool. Let's actually rewrite around that idea more. Um, and so that's a collaborative process that gets us to a set of storyboards. Um, and that whole process from like sitting down to start talking about it to getting a set of storyboards is probably 3 or 4 months. Um, and then once you've got the boards, um, that's like locked in and you kind of know like this works. Um, then it's really just all design. And you still got another like 3 or 4 months of like design work to do to get
Yeah.
the video done. So all in, a video is like takes generally 6+ months
Wow.
from start to finish.
That's
We
awesome.
we so we always have like 3 or 4,
Yeah.
sometimes 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 videos like in some sort of part of the process.
Yeah.
And so you're juggling a lot of that. Sometimes we have to truncate how much we get to talk about it up front if we want to do more production than we have time. Um, so yeah, that's a general process.
Yeah. Is there any part of that process that, like, for you and like the things that you enjoy the most that you're just like, this is my favorite part of doing this?
Yeah, generally my favorite part is the conversations.
That's cool.
Um,
So
yeah,
y'all record the conversations prior to so like the stuff that's on the podcast is prior to the video being made.
yeah, that's prior to
Okay.
scripting.
I was I had no idea. I thought the whole time that those were like after the fact. So that's really cool.
Uh,
And maybe
there
y'all
has been a
probably
few times where
okay.
it was after the fact. There's been a few times where it's like the production team's like, we need a script right now. And so what we do is this like scramble, like whiteboard session where Tim tries to give me the whole idea like in an hour or two. And then I go, okay, cool. And then I go write it. And we get it moving and then we have the conversations. That's happened like maybe 2 times and it's not ideal. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So do y'all ever have like moments where I guess like y'all kind of maybe as a team or not necessarily at conflict, but maybe you feel like this is a way to explain it and it should be this way, and then maybe Tim or whomever else has a perspective they think it should go in, and if like how do y'all go about like working through that?
Mm, I can't think of ever like a really big creative disagreement
That's
that
good.
we've had. No. I mean, for me, I just the role of an explainer. I'm like that's kind of how I think of myself.
Yeah.
Is um my main role is to help you understand an idea, and I'm not the expert. Like, um, so it's not my idea to explain. And so whatever serves the explanation of the idea is the right decision. And and with that mentality in mind, it's really easy to collaborate towards finding a really, really good creative decision.
Yeah. That's cool. So where do you see, or and this is a very broad question, where do you see or hope to see the Bible Project in 5 years?
Yeah, 5 years is a milestone for us because we work on 7 year cycles.
Wow.
Um, so we are in our second 7 year cycle. So we started in 2014. Our first 7 year cycle ended in 21. We took a Sabbath month. So we shut down the office for a month and we kind of reflected on the whole journey. And then we kind of stacked hands and we're like, okay, we're in for another 7 years. And this 7 years um, ends in 5 years. And so we're kind of towards the beginning of it. And uh, what the big challenge we want to figure out this in this 7 years is how to solve for interactive.
Mm.
Um, we have an app now,
Yeah.
and in the app is a Bible reader, very basic, and you have access to all of our content. Cool. But what can we do with an app to help you learn the literary skills while reading the Bible? Like, what would be like a true like a truly native digital Bible experience? Um, and when I say truly native, I mean like how old were you? Said you were in high school in 2012,
Yeah,
senior.
that was my senior year, so I was 17.
So how old were you in 90, like 97, 98?
3, 3 or 2.
You were
Not
you were three?
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
yeah, yeah. I'm
So this won't
27.
land. This won't land for you. But in '97, this company called MapQuest came out,
Okay.
and MapQuest was the first online map. So it used to be that if you wanted to know where to get, let me tell you, Blake, how the olden days went. When you wanted to drive somewhere you've never been, Blake, I would say, "Hey Blake, I want to come to your house." You'd be like, "Okay." And you would say, "Here's how you get here." And you go pull out a piece of paper. And I pull out a piece of paper and you would say, "All right, you're going to drive down Highway 26 and you're going to go to exit. Oh, I can't remember the exit number. It's right. It's like you're gonna see this big like warehouse on the right. It's purple. So it's right after that. It's that exit. You're gonna get off. You're gonna take a left. You're gonna go into the Wendy's. You're gonna take a right. And it's like and I'm writing this down. MapQuest came out and you just type in two addresses and then it spits you out directions. And it was a game changer. And what MapQuest didn't do was say, okay, well, here's an analog map. Let's just scan it and make it available for you on a screen. What they did was like they turned it into a natively digital experience where you could like put in one address, put another address, and it tells you the best way to get to where you're going. And then since then, Google Maps has just like continually innovated on that. And now you can do Street View, you can do Google Earth, you know which lane to get in when, all these things. And that's a truly native digital experience for a map. So, what is a truly native digital experience for a Bible?
Hmm.
Where you can interact with the text to see its structure and patterns. You can tell it like, "Hey, I want to learn about the image of God, like, and this is what I want to learn," and it spits you out like curriculum,
Hmm.
or a reading plan, um, and uh, that is a really cool design challenge that we're tackling that we want to be able to know. We want to crack that code. We want to figure that out. Um, so that's the big thing. At the end of this 5 years, we'll have done enough feature testing where we're like we've got it. Like, not that we've built the whole thing, but it's like we know what this is. Like, we know how to build this thing, um, so that you can learn to read the Bible as ancient Jewish meditation literature in an interactive way and a very natively digital experience. So that's one big thing. There's just more media we want to create.
Yeah.
We have our eye on virtual reality and augmented reality, and are experimenting with that and planning towards that because it's going to be a big educational opportunity once that media and platform gets dialed in. So those are some of the things, yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. And it's really interesting because like for me, I never thought that I never thought the Bible would be like that, like an interactive like thing. It just is always kind of like I'm just gonna read it and try to understand. But the allowance of what y'all are doing with imagination and creativity, it just brings this whole world, which it is really this whole world to life. And it's just really, I think it's really cool. Um
Well, and this was what the scribes were doing in their minds, right? So,
yeah,
like, when
yeah.
they would think about the scroll of Genesis, they understood its structure and they could visualize it. Yes, it was on this scroll written really densely because don't have a lot of real estate and that's expensive, but they understood its literary structure and they can kind of like they could see that structure. They like intuited it they could interact with it in their mind. And when a story would start using language patterned off another story, in their minds, they would pull those stories up together and they would think about them and how they're communicating to each other. So when King Solomon in 1 Kings 3 asks God for a Shema heart, a discerning heart, to know good from bad, you're immediately thinking like, oh, the tree of the knowledge of good and bad. Like he's asking for the tree of the knowledge of good and bad. And like, because all of this language is like connected. And now those two stories are like sparking off of each other. We could do that. Like we could learn to do that like the scribes, but we also can use technology to aid
Yeah.
us
Yeah.
to like help us do it in a more accessible way, because a normal Christian or person of faith isn't going to have the time to be the nerdy scribal like guru person. Like that's just,
Yeah.
we got other things we have to do. And not every Christian needs to be that. But the cool thing about technology is it makes all of this stuff more and more accessible. And that's actually the history of Christians using technology, from scrolls to the codex to the printing press to universities to explainer videos. Like all of this is just like, how do we use technology to make this more and more accessible to more and more people?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that, obviously it's working, and the accessibility that y'all have given people, it really is making a difference in people's approach to reading the Bible, and it's helped me out tremendously. As we kind of close up, I'd love for, you kind of mentioned how before you started, doing the Bible project, that you were at a place where you kind of said like, I've kind of given up on the Bible. For some of my listeners, they're kind of in that same kind of place, and I know a lot of people that have questions and doubts and are skeptics. I'd love for them to hear maybe any words that you have for them that might could be helpful in their approach to maybe just like reapproaching the Bible, or giving the Bible a second chance.
Hmm. Yeah, I think one is just a lot of grace for yourself. I think God had a lot of grace on me kind of like before Bible Project. He um I felt this real sense of like a word from God of saying, "Hey, this whole like quiet time thing that you've been trying to do your whole life but can't figure out, like it's okay. Like um you don't have to read the Bible and then come away and feel like you've mastered it. Like that's not the point. You could read the Bible, come away with more questions than you started, and that's okay. Like it's just I want you to spend time in it. And I want you to let it become part of the air you breathe. And it's going to shape you without you noticing it. And it might even feel like nothing's happening. And so that's okay. And actually just that permission to like just that was huge. So I would say like give yourself permission. If like, I mean, some people have been traumatized. So I
Yeah.
mean, like that's a whole nother story.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if it's just like it's just discouraging and it's too hard, just give yourself permission. Just be like, yeah, it's discouraging and hard. And like, I'm not gonna totally understand it, but like I'm gonna sit down and I'm gonna read it. Read it in community. I think that's also hard for a lot of people because they've been traumatized by Christian community.
Yeah.
um, but find some people who just want to read the Bible together. There's actually these there's these two um oh man, I wish I remembered the name of the podcast, but a friend of mine was just telling me about it. These two Hollywood writers are reading through the Bible for the first time together
Oh, that's cool.
and just talking about it as they read. And they don't they do not follow Jesus. They do not believe in God, but they're just reading the Bible together. They've got their little community and they're just reading it. And it's just like, that's just do that. Just read the Bible in the community and just be like, that was weird. This is weird. Whoa, that was kind of awesome. Like, whoa, I didn't expect that. And so do it in community. even if it's not like a religious community. Um, and and then, you know, these skills, these literary skills of noticing the structure and patterns. Like if you want to start doing that, we have a How to Read the Bible series that's
Yeah.
pretty kind of introductory, which is nice. You can like consult those. You can go in the deep end and you can take like a classroom class
Yeah.
and just kind of watch it being used. There's actually a an intro to Hebrew Bible class, and I
Yeah.
think it's just a couple hours, and it kind of gives you like overview of like those skills. So you could take that class. But yeah, just give yourself some grace.
Yeah. That's cool. Yeah. I would agree to all those points. Those are all very, very helpful. And yeah, I'll post a link to the y'all's website and links to those things that you mentioned in the notes. But yeah, John, I really appreciate you coming on today and just kind of talking with us about what all y'all do and how it's impacted you. It's clear that that stuff really does kind of change people's approach to how they read the Bible and the impact that it has in their following of Jesus. And that's my hope is for this podcast is people are able to listen to the voices, and it helps them kind of in their faith journey. So I really appreciate you coming on and talking with me today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks, Blake.